Hey, and welcome to the series about new tips and tricks inside of Office 2016. We've seen a bunch of them, right? We talked about autofill, we talked about column adjustments, and we went through tons of these important features that aren't necessarily added in 2016, but that are important that you know for, efficiency's sake. But we also seen some really new fancy features like flash fill, right? And some of the map charts that were added. I love these things. To finish off everything, right, we're going to talk about pivot tables. One of the most important and fancy features that Excel has, and I think it's really the fancy tool in Excel. People like to say, "Oh, I use pivot tables," and I understand because it's really great. So today, let's see a bit of pivot tables. I'll go through it briefly, like I did with tables, but I'm also going to show you this new feature called the timeline slicer, which really makes it interesting for you guys to be able to look at data through time. So here, let's go inside of Excel, right? So here I am. I'm in Excel. And in Excel, you'll notice that I've got a data file, right? My data file is a good data file because it's going to let me use pivot tables. I'm going to try to put my face in a pleasant area for this exercise, but it will be a bit difficult. So here, as I'm trying to make a pivot table, it's not difficult to make a pivot table, but I recommend making a table first, right? So what's a table? The shortcut's Control T. So I hit Control T, it's going to tell me, where's your table? I'm like, my data's, that's right, it's in A1 to H301, and my table has headers. So I hit OK, and it becomes a table. The styles comes up, I get the blue and white lines. And now, all I have to do is press on this Summarize with Pivot Table button, which shows up in the Design tab. I click Summarize with Pivot Table. It's asking me some other questions. Now, naturally, most of the time, you're just going to hit OK to this, because it's going to create it in a new worksheet, right? So I just hit OK, and I create it in a new worksheet, and I get my pivot table. Now, some of you might have never worked with pivot tables before, and honestly, that happens, right? That happens. I'm just going to move around my face, as I always do. It's like a moving of my face this class. But here I am in my pivot table, and a lot of people, they think that in pivot tables, you work inside of, like this side, right? And if you work inside of this side, you're going to end up having a lot of problems with your pivot tables. It's really what's on this side that's super important, right? Everything here and going down is really where all the magic is done. It's like that game as a kid where you're playing triangles and circles and you're trying to put the triangles in the triangles and the circles in the circles. It's a bit of a challenge, and pivot tables is a bit similar. It's just more of a adult version of that. So here I've got these things on the side, and what are these, right? I'm just going to double click here to give myself some space here so that we can work better inside of my Excel. But you see here I've got birthday, gender, age, ethnicity. If I go back to my data under the slicer tab here, right, you'll notice that these are the titles of my columns here. And in pivots, in sheet 1, they're all over here, birthday, gender. So let's say that I'm trying to count how many people are of each gender to see if I have a 50-50 split. That's a very easy thing to do. You drag gender in the rows, and then you drag gender into values. And look at this. 2 clicks later, I know that there's 195 men to 105 women in my data set. But maybe I'm curious to see if there's some people which are in a relationship or not in this. So I can simply drag relationship status now under gender, and you'll see it. I have 195 men, and 88 of them are in a relationship, and 107 of them are single. And check this out. If I go women, it's written 105, and in a relationship one's 55, and single one's 50. And this was done like 3 clicks. 3 clicks, I found this information. This is something that's incredible when you really think about it. Not only that, you can even change how the data is perceived. So check this one out. I'd like these to be percentages, right? So to change this, you have to remember that this button exists here. If you go on this little count of gender, you go value field settings. Here, you can change how your values are mathematically done. So a sum, a count. I wanted a count, so I'm going to leave it to count. But if I go here, you'll notice I can show the values as something. I can show them as no calculation, but I can also show them as percentage of the grand total. But in this one, I wanted them parent row total, because if you look at my data, the 195 is the parent of the 88 and 07, and the 15 is the parent. So I'm going to hit OK. And by looking at this, you can see that men tend to be, small. If you double click things, it creates that data, right? So that's what happened right over here. I double clicked it, and because of that, it happened. I go back to my pivot, sorry. So here you can see I've got 4513 and 5487 and 5238 and 4762. So I can see that men tend to be a bit more single and women in my data seem to be a bit more in a relationship. And I saw it with percentages, and it didn't take forever. It's really easy. But what's nice about this is not the fact that as pivot tables can be used and modified like this, it's the fact that pivot tables now added a new slicer. So if I go under analyze, you'll notice I have insert slicer and I also have insert timeline. So a slicer is like before, all right? So if I add a slicer for ethnicity, you'll note that this is going to be my ethnicity slicer here. And if I use it, right, if I pick Asian, look at my data. So in Asians, men are 61% single and 38%, 61% in a relationship and 38% single. So it seems to be the opposite trend for Asians. If I go on white, it seems to be, clearer like the standard. What about other, right? So I can easily see ethnicity changes in my data just by having a slicer. But this is not the slicer that's interesting because that one already existed inside of Office. The one that exists now inside of Office is insert timeline, and this one only works with dates like birth dates. And in this example, it gives me this fancy slicer right here that's like a timeline. It's a big line. And you'll notice here that it's got tons of data because it's trying to display it monthly. You can choose to show it yearly. So this is going to do a year and another year and another year. So if you're curious to know what happens to the people that are born in 84 to 86, you hold 84 to 86. And this is the people that are born in 84 to 86, and this is the report. So if you want 88 to 191, this is the report for 88 191. It's super impressive. Maybe you want it monthly, right? So then you can see the February or the March. You also have quarters, right? So you want to do this quarterly analysis of what's happening in quarter two, right, of different time periods. So you can do quarter two to quarter two here, and these are all the people from this quarter to this quarter. This slicer was added, and it helps us work with time-based data so much better than before when it wasn't there. And this gives us a ton of business intelligence and gives us a ton of use that we couldn't do before, and that doesn't require us programming anything. So big ups to Excel for creating such a cool slicer, and I hope that you liked it. And this was my short explanation of pivot tables. I encourage you to go check out my longer videos on pivot tables. It's a big topic, and I've got tons of stuff on it, and you might be interested in learning a bit more. But for now, this concludes this wonderful training period that we did on tips and tricks. I hope that you like my little review where I re-explained a lot of the topics that we saw in class. If you've got any questions or comments, or you think that you have any constructive criticism, you can naturally just send me an email or send me a message. But remember that the files are on jameswdh.com/finance, but if you'd like to review me, go on jameswdh.com/review and leave a comment about how you felt about these videos or how you felt about my classes. Really nice to have you, and I hope that you practice all of this and you use all of this. JamesWDH signing off, right? Stay innovative, keep learning, right? That's important.